Alright folks, with the skies becoming a more frequent means for travel in the apocalypse, I thought it'd be a fun idea to take you through the history of flight in the Walking Dead universe. Just to be clear, I'm no aviation expert, so I'm not going to be listing the model of every aircraft or any of that sort of thing. Instead, I'm here to discuss these instances in relation to the overall story. But with 26 seasons of The Walking Dead content out there, it's almost inevitable I'm gonna miss an example or two, so if I do, I highly encourage you to join in on the conversation by letting me know in the comments down below. And if you end up enjoying this type of content, don't forget to drop a like on this video and subscribe on your way out. But why is flight something we should even care about in The Walking Dead? Well, in a world we initially perceived to be quiet and dying, the sight of an active aircraft can be rather alien. In a way, they represent the progress of society in the modern timeline. But that wasn't always the case. You see, on the night of August 27th, 2010, aka Monument Day, planes traveling around the world would quickly turn into metal death traps as we see in the Flight 462 webisode, as those who initially departed from the airports in search of vacation would instead find themselves locked above the clouds with no escape. Whether it was from something as simple as a heart attack, or maybe a hidden bite that wasn't yet understood, but these planes would inevitably be overrun, sending them nosediving across the world. Some would hit the ocean, but just as fast as they fell, their now turned fellow passengers would begin to claw at them from the sea. However, they somehow were still the lucky ones, as they at least stood a chance at surviving. But for those who weren't as fortunate to be above the waves at this time, would instead hit the ground in a fiery blaze. For the children down below during this horrific time, this event would be so traumatizing they would later in life refer to it as the night the sky fell. And this would be the case across the world as well, extending to the civilians of Paris, as they too would experience their aircrafts plummet to the ground, with one instance seeing a helicopter smash into the Eiffel Tower, permanently damaging the monument for the apocalyptic years to come. But once the initial chaos settled back over in America, the skies would become rather quiet for the next 2 weeks as the military enacted its on-the-ground campaign to take the major cities back from the dead. But as we know, they would fail in their mission before abandoning their established safe zones. For those already surviving outside the secured fences, the sound of helicopter blades may have been interpreted as salvation, but they would quickly discover just how wrong they were, as on the 9th of September through the 10th, what was left of the federal government would order the Air Force to drop napalm on every major metropolitan city in the country in an attempt to burn away the dead, and by extension, the living who were unfortunate enough to be caught in the flames, effectively assuring America's doom for years to come. Although, over in Philadelphia, the might of the Pennsylvania National Guard as well as defecting pilot Donald Okafor would be enough to fend off the rest of the Air Force from their city as they would reign victorious in what would later be known as the Second American Civil War, showing us, despite having the edge over the rest of the population, operating an aircraft wasn't a survival cheat code in the apocalypse. Building onto this, we see many abandoned military and evacuation helicopters throughout the series, either left behind when overrun or crashed within safe zones from what's presumed to be bitten passengers during an escape. We actually see this exact scenario play out in the Walking Dead Survival Instinct game, as Merle prevents Daryl from boarding a helicopter with a bitten pilot. This reinforces death is one step ahead despite the aerial advantage. If something as advanced as a helicopter can't save them, what can? However, within the first year, while your average survivor was eating worms and sleeping in ditches, the surviving military pockets across the country who escaped the initial chaos were left without orders, and would spend what time they had left circling the metropolitan areas by air searching for, well, anything really. Some would band together in the countryside while others would retreat to the various military bases such as Fort Connors, but like most in this horrific world, they would all eventually meet their end one way or another. The same could be said about civilians with access to the skies, as we see with the Auto Ranch in Fear Season 3. In time, what goes up must come down, no matter how that comes to be. And over the next 2 years, it would appear nothing would ever be going up again, as fuel expires around the country and silence falls upon the clouds. Or so we thought, as by the war against the Saviors in Season 8, our perspective on this world would change forever. You see, this is where the presence of helicopters and other aircrafts turned from monuments grasping onto the past to a sign of progress and advancement. Fuel has gone bad, so to be flying around at this point in the timeline, you would have to be established enough to produce it yourself. By now, it has been 5 seasons since the skies were alive, so when a helicopter marked with a strange symbol soars over Rick's head while on his way to the junkyard, we, as an audience, along with Rick, discover there is a much bigger world out there somewhere. We know this now to be the Civic Republic military, the remnants of the Pennsylvania National Guard who surveyed the country in secrecy by helicopter while remaining out of sight of our survivors, before forming the alliance of 3 with 2 other super colonies. Over the years, they established connections with smaller communities by trading supplies for imprisoned test subjects and soldiers, one of whom would eventually be Rick Grimes himself, as Jadis trades him for a spot amongst their ranks. But little did we know, their covert dominance of the American airspace around this time was soon to be challenged, as our Fear crew following the war would utilize a full-on plane they found to travel across state with Althea piloting, but their journey would be short as they would crash before using a group of children to help them repair it. But when parts were in need of transportation from point A to point B, they would use a promotional hot air balloon for Augie's Ale to fly said parts over to the rest of the crew in one of Fear the Walking Dead's sillier moments. This is the only time a hot air balloon is used in the apocalypse from what we see, and I think that's for obvious reasons. If Kaltaka Walker was able to nearly shoot down the helicopter in Fear Season 3, what do you think would happen if someone did the same to this thing? Now, following Rick's disappearance, 8 years would go by without our main group spotting anything in the sky. But that doesn't mean it wasn't active, as the CRM would continue with their work flying from place to place while maintaining secrecy. You know, unless they were on Fear. In that case, these guys were everywhere. But once again, like we saw during Operation Cobalt, these aircrafts would eventually be used against the civilian population, as the Civic Republic military would utilize their advantage of elevation to lead megahordes through super colonies in order to stage a natural fall for the cities, eliminating the alliance of 3 altogether, all in an effort to reduce the strain on their resources by diminishing the population while covering their tracks from the CR's leaders. It's a stupid plan, but luckily, before it's concluded, Rick and Michonne would single-handedly wipe out the malevolent side of the CRM with one well-placed explosion, finally turning the American airspace from a dangerous place to be with the CR's dominance to something serene for the first time since the fall, as the Civic Republic remnants would finally use their advancements for the good of humanity by delivering food and supplies across the country via helicopter. And this time of peace in the skies would reflect on what we see in the modern day, as by Daryl Dixon, The Book of Carol, your average survivor is able to peacefully fly above the wasteland with no opposition, given they know how, that is. Acting as a sign of rebirth, a man we would come to know as Ash would find a crashed Model 35 Beechcraft Bonanza in a field and rebuild it by hand, while producing his own ethanol to be converted to fuel with his spare time. Not only does this plane act as a way for Ash to look towards the future with it being used as a coping mechanism following the death of his son, but it does the same for Carol, as this was her ticket to find her lost friend Daryl across the sea. This means, in the modern Walking Dead timeline, it is quite possible and, frankly, kind of easy to travel between continents in a safe and timely fashion. Again, given you have the means to do it. So what does this mean for the future of the universe? Well, it's clear the Daryl Dixon series is being used to expand the world and show us what things are like in different countries, adopting a sort of roadshow-like theme that was initially planned before the ending of the main show. With all these instances of aviation and world expansion, it seems this universe is heading towards a re-globalization-like direction. With the fall of the malevolent CRM sectors, America is more connected now than ever. So the next logical step is to start looking outwards. With groups in France actively trading with American civilians by ship, this process of re-globalization has already begun. I can imagine a future where this new reformed CRM, and by extension our survivors, have outposts and settlements across the world. With Rick and Michonne having pull within the CR, and Daryl/Carol acting as a type of liaison for the European side of the world, this could become a reality depending on the direction Daryl Dixon Season 3 takes. We once thought interstate coalitions were as advanced as it gets in this broken world, but with the direction we've been heading in this universe, it seems intercontinental alliances linked through aviation could be a thing we see in the future. But what do you guys think? Does flight represent progress and advancement in the apocalypse? And what possibilities do these achievements bring for the future? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.